So, last issue gave us some pretty good setup, but as is often the case with these earlier Sonic & Knuckles comics, we have an unfortunate track record of having decent to great setup, but poor payoff or execution. We've got the idea of an impersonator within the Brotherhood ranks, and the return of a self-exiled Guardian, as well as Knuckles confronting Kragok in an attempt to get some answers for what exactly happened in the past during Tobor's time. It's legitimately a good setup and seems like it's gearing up for some sort of exciting shakeup of status quo that we've needed for a little while now, so let's see where this goes. But not before taking a look at our cover for this issue, and I don't think it's quite as good as the last one, though it does try to be about as action-centric as before, with Kragok attacking a downed Knuckles, while the constable stands at the bars unable to help. Unfortunately, the artwork on the characters kind of lets this one down, and the more you stare at it, the more weird it looks. Both Kragok and Knuckles' mouths look like they're on the sides of their face beside their nose, and yes, I'm aware that mouth shifting is kind of a regular thing for Sonic characters, but here, it is taken to its logical extreme, and it just looks goofier than normal. The gleam on Kragok's hand is also kind of distracting and so pronounced, with it being in the very center of the picture, that it can kind of be a bit much. Still, the setting of the crumbling jail cell does look pretty cool. We open on Tobor enjoying some tea at Lara Lay's with Lara and Julie Sue herself, just glad to finally be back to what he considers a normal existence with family. Lara, however, is unable to contain her curiosity and decides to ask him which was more important to him, being a guardian or being a family man. Tobor admits that he never gave the situation much thought, saying that both seemed like such normal, natural facts of life to him that he never considered how the two could contradict or conflict with one another. But before we can listen in on any more of that conversation, we cut over to Knuckles and Kragok in the jail cell, Kragok saying that he's willing to talk, but only one-on-one. While Constable Remington is very heavily against it, Knuckles agrees and orders the door closed and locked so that the two of them are not disturbed, even going as far as to order Remington to get away from the door, far enough away so that he wouldn't even be within shouting distance. Reluctantly, Remington does as he's told, not wanting to go against the Guardian's wishes, and Kragok is rather impressed by Knuckles' willingness to meet him one-on-one, wondering if it's because he's a fool, or because he's got a great big pair of knuckles. You gotta love innuendo in these kids' comics. And on that note, we cut back over to Haven, where Locke is currently attempting to make some repairs to the damaged circuit, but doesn't seem to be making any progress. He even muses to his own father that such a specific failure might have been an act of sabotage, an idea that his father balks at, considering that the only folks who could be responsible would reside in Haven, meaning one of their own family members. Though Locke does state that he's not making accusations, just that the problem seems a bit bigger than they initially thought. And again, because we can't continue along this thread apparently, we cut back to the jail cell, where Knuckles is making something of a worrying face before demanding that Kragok tell him everything he knows about Tobor, even threatening him with the fact that, as a Guardian, he's above normal Echidna law, and so could use some very less than savory methods to get that info if he wants it. How very heroic of you, Knuckles. I know he's a villain and all, but still, way to abuse your station. Kragok demonstrates that the local authorities aren't much better at their job, as his robotic arm is still operational and very dangerous, hitting Knuckles with a blast of energy before the two of them start to brawl. But before the fight can continue for very long, their clashing apparently causes some sort of overload of energy, activating a dimension rift to open up and depositing them somewhere else, much to Kragok's dismay, as he's apparently been here before. Back with Lara Lay and Tobor, she wonders how Hawking could have been able to mistake Moratory Rex for his son, and Tobor admits that he thought long and hard about this, stating that between the rather terrible fight that the two of them had and then getting crushed under the rubble, it's possible that they were far too mangled to be immediately recognizable. Even after he got out of the rubble, it wasn't until he met a doctor out in the country, who turns out to be Dr. Quack, that he was able to get fully healed up, to the point where his eyes had to be operated on to stop his vision from deteriorating any further. He further speculates that, in addition to injuries, Rex could have feigned memory loss or pretended to harden himself in accordance with being a guardian, thereby avoiding detection. Lara still doesn't seem entirely convinced that Tobor's wife would have been fooled, but Tobor doesn't have an answer despite agonizing over that for a good long while. Back in the floating space dimension, identified as the Twilight Zone, Kragok and Knuckles continue to fight, Knuckles beating Kragok into submission, demanding answers about Tobor, even going as far as to crush and bend his cybernetic hand. But never mind that, we're back in Haven again. The other Guardians are discussing current events, musing on how easily their entire operation was taken out by a single part failing, which one of them, Sojourner, points out is due to the simplicity of Haven, which is also why it's so efficient. But his big worry is their vulnerability at the moment, though it is pointed out that the Dark Legion is currently at a low point themselves. But while they're busy talking, quote-unquote Tobor sits, looking very contemplative, separated from the rest of the ancestors. And back to the fight with Kragok and Knuckles, where Kragok finally seems to be willing to talk, and we get a brief recap of how the Dark Legion and the Brotherhood got started with Edmund and Miniker and whatnot, but as it turns out, the Dark Legion was able to periodically escape imprisonment, and through this, they discovered that time moved much slower for them, roughly 1 generation passing for them for every 4 back in the primary dimension. Somehow, Morituri Rex discovered that he was able to watch others outside of the zone they were trapped in, allowing him to spy on Tobor and use that as a means of planning his attack, leading him to allegedly disposing of Tobor and replacing him, using the fact that things were a bit of a mess there to cover up his infiltration. Before Knuckles can get out of him where his father Morituri is now, Kragok pulls a classic look out behind you trick, sucker punching Knuckles and heading to a big energy portal out in the distance, Knuckles following right behind. Back in Lara's apartment, Julie Sue and Lara Leigh have been looking through old family albums and realize that there are no pictures of Tobor or his wife, Vanika, in any of them, with Tobor musing that Morituri would probably have tried to remove any traces of Tobor and his immediate family so as to keep his identity as ironclad as possible. Before he can continue his musing, he suddenly gets a sense that Knuckles is in trouble, opening the window to fly out to go and assist, with Lara shouting that she wants to know what's happening with her son. Fair thing to say. However, she immediately changes her tune and tells a rather nonplussed Julie Sue that it's about time for them to have a talk. Tobor notes that somehow Knuckles is projecting his visage into Tobor's eye implants, allowing him to know right where the portal into the Twilight Zone is going to open, just as the portal opens and Kragok hops out, immediately recognizing Tobor and taking a shot at him as Knuckles starts to pull out of the portal as well, ready for more of a fight. But after landing a punch, Tobor grabs Kragok by his robes, stating that this is his fight, and starts to drag him back toward the portal, intent on settling a few scores while he's in the Twilight Zone, starting with Kragok. And then the portal closes behind them, with Knuckles wishing Tobor good luck in his indiscriminate destruction of whoever else is on the other side of the portal. Back at the apartment, we come in on the tail end of a conversation where Lara Leigh is essentially telling Julie Sue not to expect to become anything more than friends with Knuckles. Julie very quick to say that she is more than happy with things as they are now. Knuckles chooses this time to arrive back at the house and is immediately hugged by both ladies, everyone actually seeming pretty happy that they're all okay, and even Knuckles seems to enjoy the attention he's paid. Meanwhile, back at Haven, they finally manage to get things back up and running just in time to see Knuckles reunited with his mother and friend, who happens to be a girl, just as she plants a small smooch on his cheek. Some of them even seeming rather intrigued with the idea of a Guardian getting together with a Legionnaire. But someone who isn't very happy is Tobor, now all but confirmed to be Morituri Rex, musing to himself that he's not sure what made Julie Sue act so strangely, though he swears that the Dark Legion isn't going to allow this union to go forward. Locke's father even encourages Locke to take his son's example and enjoy his life a little bit more. Locke says that he'll consider it, and we end the issue with Morituri thinking about how he's going to have to be ready for any sort of contingency down the road. This issue is still enjoyable, but unfortunately it does fall back into a lot of the same annoying traps of some of the previous issues. For example, rather than focusing on a primary main scene, we constantly flip-flop between 3 separate scenes, and while they all do converge in the end, the fact that we're spending 1 or 2 pages on one scene and then hopping to another, it feels disjointed at times, and sometimes the shift from one scene to the other feels really abrupt. Looking at the way the issue was structured, you definitely couldn't just lump all 3 of them together, but switching between them makes it hard for someone like me, who already has trouble focusing at times, to keep track of everything. It just aggravates my ADHD heavily. I'm also not a fan of Knuckles threatening violence using his station. Do I think he would use violence regardless? Yes, indeed, that's just part of his character, but I don't believe he would use the position as guardian, essentially saying he was above the law like a dirty cop or something. I mean, yeah, again, we're dealing with what's essentially a supervillain here, but still, Knuckles didn't have to basically outright state that, as a guardian, he could murder people unchecked without consequence. It's a rather unsettling thing to bring up. I'm also not sure why Tobor was so quick to just leap back into the Twilight Zone with Kragok rather than just banishing him back. I get that he wants to raise some hell and all that, but he could have gone to the Brotherhood, brought all of this up, but then we wouldn't have the mystery of when Morituri would be making his move. The issue also manages to at least make the Brotherhood a little bit more interesting to me, as it actually looks like they're slowly starting to be a bit more proactive. Better late than never, I suppose. At the very least, it seems like they might be taking a more active role in the story. The action scenes are decent, but they're very brief, and unfortunately a lot of the combat isn't really portrayed in the best of ways. There are a few good solid punches here and there, but overall the flow between panels makes it difficult to follow the actions of our combatants. The narration is actually a bit better this time around, and I really like Tobor's musings on how Morituri was able to avoid detection for so long, as it helps answer a lot of the questions that were raised by the previous issue. And in a series that likes to spin its wheels so much, I am not going to take that for granted. Courtesy of Galan, Papoy, and Grossman, the art this time around is pretty well executed. While the action scenes sometimes struggle to convey what's happening, the general flow of the issue is pretty well handled. Everyone looks pretty good, though there aren't quite as many strange mouth shapes that we've seen before, instead many of them taking on some simplified anime look to them, which I honestly think works well for this sort of art style. And I will say it here, since I didn't say it last time, I do legitimately like Tobor's design. He's basically another Knuckles recolor, but the eyes really do it for me. And I honestly feel like he stands out more than Knuckles with beard, or Knuckles with metal eye and arm. Kragok's design is also pretty decent though, I'll admit, even again if it's just slapping some metal parts onto Knuckles' base. Gotta say I'm also a little bit disappointed by the look of the Twilight Zone. I mean, even the Hidden Zone was a little bit more interesting, but basically just floating in space was really boring. It's true we weren't there for very long, but I would have liked to see something a bit more, I don't know, populated, rather than it just being a starry void. We don't even get an idea of what sort of civilization or society the Dark Legion has, which was a little disappointing. But again, we weren't there for very long, I suppose. So overall, a pretty decent issue, and I'm hoping that we can keep the quality high, because once again, we're gonna keep dipping into the Knuckles issues for a while longer. See you all when we go and take a look at Knuckles the Echidna, issue 19. I'll see you next time, everyone.